Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session today. Thank you for joining us on what looks like a very sunny Friday afternoon in Trieste, and I hope it's also sunny wherever you are joining from. My name is Marzia Mazzonetto, and I have the pleasure today to be facilitating this session. We are going to talk in details about an experiment that we are running, some research that we are performing within the context of EU-funded project that is called Rethink. So we are actually all based in different locations, all the speakers that you will see today, and within different institutions, but we work under the same umbrella of this EU-funded project called Rethink. What do we do in Rethink? We actually focus on trying to understand how science communication is changing in view of a lot of things that are changing around us. So the way that communication is happening is very different compared to before. You might have probably noticed that we have access to science in many different ways. Social media, of course, play a very important role, but we also have a closer relationship with scientific research. So there is a whole process of opening up science that is happening around us. So we will tell you a bit more about the methodological approach that we have, that we are using in this project that is focused on how people make sense of science. We will be telling you a bit about the research that we have performed so far, and we will also we would have loved to have more interaction with all of you. Of course, it will be very difficult in a virtual setting, but we will try to have also a little bit of interaction to give you a taste of the type of research that we perform in Rethink. I'm going to just briefly introduce the four speakers that we have today, but then they will be telling you more about themselves in their own presentations. We have a colleague from SISSA Media Lab, Enrico Maria Balli, that is CEO of SISSA Media Lab in Trieste, that is just next to me right now, virtually at least. Our second speaker will be Frank Cooper, who is actually the coordinator of the Rethink project. And he's assistant professor of science communication at the Vrije University in Amsterdam, based at the Tina Institute. The next speaker will be Andy Ridgeway, who is a senior lecturer in science communication at the University of West of England, based in Bristol. And finally, the last speaker will be Birte Farnit, senior researcher at the Center for Political Communication of the Zeppelin University. And then we will hopefully have time for some questions and answers that we will try to answer through the chat. So please, if you have any questions throughout the session, do not hesitate to write them in the specific Q&A, and we will do our best to address them throughout the session. So before going into the first presentation, I'm really happy to have with us Enrico Maria Balli today. As I mentioned, he's the CEO of SISSA Media Lab based in Trieste, and he's actually the only one to be so lucky to be physically at ISOF today. And we can see a really nice blue sky behind him. So please, Enrico, if you like, it would be really nice for you to welcome us to at least virtually to Trieste today.
Thank you, Marza. Buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti a Trieste. Welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to host you in beautiful Trieste this afternoon. It's a shame that you couldn't physically attend our workshop in Trieste, because Trieste is a beautiful city, and today is really a more than beautiful day. I just would like to show you a little bit of the real ISOF, because I'm physically located now in the Unity Square of Trieste. That is one of the different locations, one of the different venues of the ISOF conference. And it's really a shame that I'm the only one physically in Trieste. But as you can see, as of is going on, there is a lot of people and a lot of different activities beside our workshop. And so again, welcome, and I really hope that you will enjoy our session this afternoon.
Thank you, Enrico, and we would really love to be there with you today. So without further ado, let's jump into our research work. We're really happy to be sharing some insights with you today. So I'm going to switch to our first speaker today, Frank Cooper, who will be sharing some of the key outcomes that we have had so far in our research project.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Cooper. As Marcia said, I'm from Amsterdam. I was trained as a biologist, philosopher, and theater maker. And in my work in science communication, I combine these three disciplines in shaping the dialogue between science and society. So you can imagine how happy I was to be able to coordinate the Rethink project, which is exactly about that. You see a picture of our dedicated team here and the logos of the organizations that put this project together and make it real throughout Europe. The starting point of our project is that communication about science in society has become increasingly challenging and complex because of two interrelated issues that Marcia already mentioned. The first one is the blurring of the boundaries between science and society. So since a number of decades, we see that more and different connections between science and society arise. There's a lot of collaboration, but the broadening of the range of actors has also broadened the range of issues that are or should be discussed. So next to more collaboration, there's also more discussion and controversy. The other related trend is what we call the digital revolution, the digitalization of media, which has led to an increasing diversity of channels, platforms, modes of communication, but also diversity of players involved in science communication. Not only certified professionals, but also amateurs or citizens that communicate science from their vision and perspective. Digital revolution has given us what Brian Trench has once called access to backstage conversations. So in the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, you can now see two epidemiologists disagreeing on Twitter about what the appropriate assumptions of a transmission model are. Whereas in the past, these kind of disagreements which are very familiar for the practice of science, would only happen in scientific conferences, so behind closed doors. Now they are taking place in public. The big question is how to deal with this. So the hypothesis of our project is that these two trends and the issues that are related to these trends change the working practices of scientists and science communication professionals, and also the ways by which citizens make sense of science. What we are doing in this project is to tie these two ends together. The Rethink project aims to, first of all, better understand this landscape, science communication landscape that is arising. Who are the actors and players? What are they doing? Second, in the second phase of the project, we aim to develop new and improved ways to communicate science, and also develop a framework for the quality of communicating science in a digital age. Throughout the project, there's a special focus on openness and reflexivity that we see as needed given this ongoing integration between science and society. Now, I want to tell you a bit more about the underlying concept and approach of the project before I take you to the sense-making methodology that we are using for one of our studies. So we take the science communication ecosystem as a starting point and look at all the actors and their relations and the roles that they are playing in this system. And particularly also at their repertoires, which is a term for the combination of how they look at science communication and what they do. Then the next step is to look at sense-making practices. So how do people in their ordinary lives, from their perspective, get to understand, make sense of new developments in science and technology? And finally, we look at the quality of interactions in this complex evolving system, with a focus on openness and reflexivity, and with a eye to what we call transformative learning. That transformative part is a very important aspect of our project. At the beginning of the project, we have set up 7 what we call rethinker spaces in different countries in Europe. You see here Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, UK, Sweden, Italy, and Serbia. Now, these rethinker spaces are transdisciplinary groups, so bringing scientists, science journalists, science communicators, policymakers, science communication scholars together to join us in this inquiry and learning process that we are setting up. So these rethinker spaces, they function not only as a research site, but also as a learning hub and as a platform to spread the rethink methodology. So in this setting, we are doing our research, and currently we are in the middle of a study into citizen sense-making practices, and we have decided to make that the focus of our session today. Originally, we wanted to do this study on the topic of climate change, but after the COVID-19 pandemic hit Europe, we decided that there was no other option than to talk about COVID-19 and to possibly make a contribution to how we as societies deal with this pandemic. And why is sense-making important? I already mentioned these trends that are at the core of our project. So we see an increased range of actors that are involved in public discussions, and therefore also an increased range of issues that need to be discussed. Scientific knowledge is in these discussions only one of the ingredients that are discussed. Also, other aspects of the discussion are involved. And notably, discussions about facts are always also discussions about values, ideology, and power. So this analysis of public discussions lies at the core of our decision to look at sense-making. So we believe that careful attention is needed to the processes through which scientific knowledge, but also values and the way we frame issues are communicated. And we should, in doing that, look at the plurality of perspectives that are involved and the multiple framings of an issue. Here, for example, you see a brief article of the Mail Online that is about the computer code that predicted 500,000 casualties from COVID-19 and inspired the first response of the UK. Now, this article says this computer code is a mess, and therefore the response of the UK is also a mess. In The Guardian, a counter article has said that actually there is a good scientific basis for the lockdown measures. Now, the question, if you as a reader or as a citizen, if you see this, you have to figure out what is true and what is not. And how do you know that? Where do you find your basis to make an assumption of that? And if you have no time or a possibility to find all this information yourself, who do you trust to find out for you? Now, these kind of very basic questions are at the root of how we deal with this kind of information. And to figure out how this process works, we took a sense-making approach. Sense-making is the process by which we develop an understanding of a complex reality. So whenever we are confronted with an uncertain situation, we have to ask ourselves this sense-making question: what is going on here? And it's important to realize that the sense-making is always constrained. So we sort of take the next step in our interpretation and our actions upon this interpretation in the absence of completeness. There are a lot of different factors that we use, a lot of different aspects that we use to make sense. And it's important to recognize that sense-making is an activity, it's a process that is going on all the time. In our sense-making study, we try to tap into this process because we believe it's important for science communicators to reflect on that and to adapt their way of communicating to these kind of processes. So our starting point is that sense-making is a very situated form of behavior. So if you want to study communication, you shouldn't study messages or channels, but you should study how a participant makes sense of that information from her perspective. And we do this by so-called micro-moment interviews. In the micro-moment interview, we ask ourselves the question: what happens in the moment that an individual is attempting to make sense of a new situation that she is confronted with? What kind of questions does this person have? What kind of things need to be found out or need to be learned or to understood? Where does this information come from? Now, with these micro moments, we try to tap in this sense-making practice. So far, we have done 80 micro moment interviews in 8 different countries. Next to our 7 Rethinker Space countries, we've also done a series of interviews in Germany. We are in the middle of collecting and analyzing this data. And in the next presentation of my colleague Andy Ridgeway from Bristol, you will see a few highlights of the things that we find. But first, Marcia is going to take you through a demonstration to give you the ability to experience a micro moment yourself.
Va bene così? Mi sentite bene? Sì. Okay, so as Frank was saying, we have been focusing on trying to spot some moments throughout this COVID-19 pandemic crisis that have been particularly significant for us individually, on a very individual level. So I would like to ask you if you feel like to go to, so dial in your browser, wherever you can do it on your phone. It's really easy to open. You can even just scan this QR code that you probably are able to see on your screen, or just dial slido.com, as you see here in the left part of my slide. And then you can write the code that appears here. So it's hashtag R207. I would like to ask you if you would like to have a taste of our research work to join us in this experiment. And when you go to slido.com and you dial in this code that appears here, you will see a first question that appears on your screen. The question is, we would like to ask you to think about a moment throughout this COVID-19 pandemic crisis when you felt puzzled, something that really stayed in your head, something that really is marked in your memory as a really important moment in that phase. And then I would like to ask you to describe what you were feeling in that moment using maximum 3 words. So you can write 1 word and then send it. And then you can write a second word and then a third word. You're not obliged, of course, to write 3 words. You can write just 1 or 2. It can be any word. Any word that describes how you felt in a very striking, important moment for you throughout this crisis. I'm going to wait a little bit because I know that there is some delay between the moment when we are broadcasting and the moment when people can see this. But I see there are already 3 persons participating. So please take a moment to think about these 3 words. You can enter 1 word at a time. All the data are completely anonymous, so please do not worry about your name being associated with the word that you are typing here. I am going to wait 1 more minute to see if anyone else would like to experiment with us. I think many of you by now are familiar with things like Slido probably. Okay, I see we have already 9 answers. I'm going to wait maybe 30 more seconds to see. Okay, let's see what have been the answers so far. Sorry. Okay, so there are 3 words that seem to be the strongest one so far. Curious, overwhelmed, and confusion. I think they are quite significant of what we have experienced. And I think we have found similar words also in the research participants that we have been talking to. But I see also a lot of other words, such as, for example, scared and confused, powerless, isolated, anxious, afraid, sad. But also some, there is a big woe, which I think says it all about what we had to face. It's quite interesting because someone wrote overinterpretation. Unqualified, also quite interesting. I'm going to just wait a few seconds to see if there are a few more words appearing, but then I would say that overwhelmed, wow, curious, and confusions really seem to be the biggest words here. Okay, I'm going to switch to the next question. So the first step in our interviews was really, as Frank was saying, to ask participants to think about meaningful moments they have been experiencing throughout this COVID-19 pandemic. And we have called them micro moments. So we have been talking with the participants about at least 1 up to 3 micro moments that have been particularly significant to them. So now, focusing on these micro moments, I would like to ask you, what do you think was the basis of what you were feeling? So all these words that you wrote before, this confused, scared, and worried, etc., but also thinking that there was confusion in what was happening around you. What do you think was, where did this feeling come from? So we have 4 possible answers there: past experience, people around me, stuff I read, and my views on society. You can choose more than one answer. You should see the same poll in the exact same page as you were before. You don't need to open a new page. Normally, you should be able to see it in the same browser page where you were before. So I'm going to wait a little bit to collect your answers. And thank you very much to all those of you who are participating. We already have 10 answers. So as I said, what do you think was the basis of your feeling? Past experience, people around you, stuff I read, or my views on society? Okay, I'm going to show you the answers so far. And there seems to be a striking preference for people around me and my views on society compared to stuff I read. It went up at the same time as I mentioned it. And no one seems to be referring to past experiences regarding their feelings. Okay, so people around me and my views on society. That's really interesting. And we would be really happy if we had the opportunity to be there in person with you now, to be able to know a bit more of what is, to go a bit deeper into these answers with you. What do you mean by people around me and my views on society? And all of a sudden we have an increase in stuff I read. Okay, and past experience seems to be really out of the league by now. Okay, we have one last step. So of course, in the interviews that we have been doing to understand how people were making sense of this corona crisis, once we have identified micro moments with the people we were talking to, and we have been reflecting on what they were feeling and the reasons for feeling that, so the links with what they were experiencing and the context within their own way of experiencing what was going on. Then we went through a last step that was focused on what did people do to move on? So what made them overcome this particularly complex situation that happened to them related to the coronavirus crisis? So I would like to ask you also in this case, if you can provide up to 3 words to tell us what did you do to move on. You can enter individual words, so please enter one word at a time and just click on send it. So think about those feelings that you have, those micro moments that you have been thinking of in the first question. And now think about what it is that you did to move on. How did you manage to overcome this situation? And try to tell us 3 words that describe your actions in that situation. I'm going again to wait a couple of minutes to give you the time to go into this 3rd question. I see some answers are coming. I'm going to wait a little bit more before showing you the word cloud. Okay, so let's see what are the words that appear here. Okay. Looks like read and work was the most shared solution for a few of us. Trust and hope that everything will return to normal. Positivity, carry on, focus, read. Read and stop reading at the same time. This is really interesting. I think I can imagine what we were reading and what we were wanting to stop reading in that moment. Pragmatism, wait, read more. Of course, read news online. Oh, someone actually went for walks in the countryside. That's quite different from all the rest. Very nice. Conversations, research, accept. That's also very interesting. Okay, so thank you very much to all of you who participated in this experiment. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Andy, who will be sharing with you a bit about how we have been actually using and analyzing the outcomes of the research that we have been conducting. But thank you very much for having participated in this experiment. And of course, you can see there the huge variety of emotions, actions, and links with personal life that intervene when we try to make sense of a very complex situation, such as that of the COVID-19 crisis. And all the information that we collect in this way really help us understanding what is happening in the individuals that try to make sense of this topic. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I thank you all very much for participating in this exercise. Thank you.
Hello there, my name's Andy Ridgeway. I'm one of the participants in the Rethink project. I'm based in the UK, live near Bristol, and I spent most of my working life as a science journalist, and I still write. I write for publications such as BBC Focus and New Scientist, and that's sort of led to my real interest in the research that is part of Rethink. I now work as a senior lecturer at the University of the West of England, and the results that I'm going to present today are as the basis of data collected by one of my colleagues, Elena Milani, who's a researcher within the Science Communication Unit, but also sort of helped by my colleagues Emma Whitecamp and Claire Wilkinson as well. So what I'm going to tell you about is I'm going to give you a snapshot of some of the data and some of the interviews that we've been doing. Frank mentioned that in total so far, 80 interviews across Europe have been done. I'll be presenting 3 of them. So by no means it's a sort of an exhaustive presentation of all of the data. It's really just there to sort of illustrate, I suppose, how people have been making sense of the coronavirus pandemic and the sorts of challenges that have been facing, and hopefully will raise some interesting questions for those involved in journalism and communicating science more broadly, and we hope that it will sort of prompt some discussions around this. So as Frank and Marcia have mentioned, the sense-making research that we've done is to try and understand more about how people make sense of what's been going on with the coronavirus pandemic. And this has revolved around certain moments in time as the pandemic has evolved and has the circumstances that people find themselves in has changed. And this has resulted in a series of sort of moments in time, perhaps, where people have had questions and uncertainty and sort of personal decisions that they've had to take and consequences for them as well. I'll just give you an example of a few here that we've experienced in the UK. I'm sure many of these will be familiar to you, because I think, you know, in many cases we've followed similar trajectories, although at different times. You know, so one issue that has caused a lot of uncertainty in the UK is the wearing of face masks. The guidance that we've been given on face masks in the UK has changed. You know, so it's prompted questions whether face masks work. Are they actually effective? Who do they protect? In what circumstances should they be worn? There were questions about when the lockdown was introduced, whether it was introduced too late, whether it could have been introduced too early. Something relevant to many of our lives at the moment is coronavirus in schools and schools reopening. What will be the consequences of that for children and parents, and is it safe to do so? And finally, there's a snapshot from BBC News website from only today, where there is apparently some questions and confusion over the quarantine rules that are introduced when people are travelling between countries, and the discrepancies in those and the sort of uncertainty that introduces, really. So what I'm going to share with you are 3 case studies of 3 individuals who were interviewed in the UK, who are quite different in many respects, but will give you sort of an idea of how their experience and their situation has shaped their sense-making processes that they've gone through. So the first case study involves a male individual who's over 70 years, who spent their working life in higher education and now lives in the countryside and regularly cycles to keep fit. The second case study involves a young male adult who graduated with a degree in environmental health and had a kidney transplant. I say that these are, you know, just snapshots of people's lives. They sound a little bit random, but it will make sense. This will make sense as I explain their case studies. Their case studies 3 is a sort of a middle-aged mum of 3 children who works as a primary school teacher and has family who work in the health service. So as we'll see, that has sort of consequences for how they've interpreted what's happened. So the first case study involving our individual who's over 70, when we interviewed them, their micro moment, one of the moments in time in the whole pandemic that they picked out was when the stay-at-home message came out from the government. In the UK, we were told to stay at home on the 23rd of March 2020. That's really when that official guidance, stay at home, unless absolutely necessary, came into place. I know in some other countries it was introduced earlier and introduced later elsewhere. this caused a great deal of concern, obviously, to many people. But how it was interpreted by this individual was very much driven by the context in which they were in. So let's remember that this is an individual who loves being out in the open air. They like being out in the countryside, and one of the things that they questioned and created uncertainty for them was that they could understand why the stay-at-home message would be relevant to people who live in urban areas, in the sort of more densely populated areas, but in the countryside, the area around them, very few people. So, that question, that sort of gap in their sort of understanding of the guidance that they're given is, well, why stay at home for me? Because there's nobody around me when I go out. So here is, I suppose, really the sorts of thought process that this individual went through as they tried to sort of understand and make sense of the situation that they were presented in with by the lockdown. So, their conception of the lockdown in terms of what it meant in its very sort of rawest sense is social distancing, keeping people apart, but also hygiene. So we're often told to sort of wash our hands, use antibacterial sort of agents and things like that. But also from their own personal experience and from their own values and their worldview, they felt that people need to be surrounded by nature for a couple of hours a day at least. It helps them feel sort of grounded in the world and connected to the world, and so this is really important to them. But also, the fact that they felt, because of the situation that we're in and the context in which they were in, they live in the countryside. Even if they went out, they're not likely to encounter people. So the result of what they did, and hasten to add, they didn't kind of break down the lockdown regulations. I think they were sort of working within them. The participant decided to sort of keep on cycling, really keen cyclist, on the basis that they avoided overcrowded spaces and followed the social distancing rules. And how they reached that point was just this sort of acknowledgement and thought that how you interpret information, this was their feeling, and the guidance is very much related to the situation you're in. So in their particular case, they were in the countryside, and so they felt comfortable with being outdoors, and then that fitted in with their sort of idea of being close to nature for at least sort of 2 hours a day. So by contrast to that, the second case study involves our sort of younger male, former environmental science student, and the situation that they were faced with, this sort of micro moment, was having conversations with friends during the lockdown who were watching YouTube clips and other content online suggesting that coronavirus is just fake news, that it's not real, and it's a sort of a product of what sort of governments have kind of cooked up. So this individual said that their friends had suggested that they watch YouTube clips and watch celebrities talking about the coronavirus situation, and that it's not real, it's fake. And that in that situation, they felt really frustrated with their friends who were listening to this information at this time. So what did they do? You were asked earlier on about what did you do when you were faced with one of those situations. What this individual did was look on medical journals and look at medical articles. I mean, have to remember here that this is an individual who has a degree, so they've been sort of educated to look at research papers, but also they said that they listened to their transplant coordinator. So this individual who sends out information to those who've had a transplant, and they sort of valued what they were, the guidance that they were given, took on board a little bit of government advice, but not much, they said. And also they described a process by which they looked at this social media content and, thinking about this is true, this isn't true. So there's some sort of subjective decision making about what's accurate or not. So this participant, this individual said that they, when they were looking at information online, bearing in mind that their friends are looking at this information that suggests that coronavirus is fake news, they picked out information that they felt was interesting and relevant to them, so that spoke to them individually. It's individual information that felt personalized to them, which they looked at. And also, this content has to be from a trusted source and proven scientifically. So this individual's context was one in which they're familiar with scientific research and the scientific process. So that formed part of their decision making in terms of how they interpreted that information. The final example that I want to give you is the mum of three, and her kind of micro moment, I suppose, that's still relevant. And it's reports that a coronavirus vaccine will be ready by the end of the year. But what's created uncertainty in her mind is the fact that vaccines take usually years and years to develop. So, how can a vaccine for coronavirus be developed so quickly? So in their interview, our mum was saying, how effective is it going to be? We've only had this strain of coronavirus for just under a year, and we've had others before it, and yet they've not managed to create effective viruses for them. So a lot of uncertainty there. And what they told us was that they don't trust these days what they read on the news, in part just because of, I suppose, all the sort of different opinions that are being provided through the news. It creates a lot of uncertainty. Doesn't trust the government, but does trust those on the front line of dealing with the coronavirus situation, such as scientists working on the vaccine and her friends and family who work in the National Health Service in the UK. So people who work in the medical profession. So that has an influence on the decision-making process. And what she said was really quite interesting, just in terms of, this trust in the health service led her to feel that, well, if the health service says it's okay, they wouldn't administer it if it wasn't okay. I trust my GPs, my sort of medical professionals, I trust my GPs, and if they say it's fine, then I would be quite happy to have this vaccine. So again, very much influenced by their own sort of experience. So as I said, this is just a snapshot of the interviews that have been done, but I think illustrate the different sense-making processes and the factors and the importance of an individual's context and background in shaping how they make sense of coronavirus. So that's it from me.
No, you can go directly to Birte. Vai direttamente da Birte. Sì. Grazie.
Okay, shall I share my screen? Okay, thanks, Andy. Thanks, Thanks, Martha, for this insights into sense making. My name is Birte Fenrich. I'm a Rethink partner for Zeppelin University, which is a small university in Germany in the very south of the Lake Constance, and I have another position at the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and Humanities. And basically in both positions, I research science communication in the context of the digital transformation. And interestingly, and by coincidence, also in both projects, I deal with science communication quality as a very strong focus in my research. However, in the Rethink project, I've dealt with quality, but I have also dealt with science communication training, because we think that science communication training is a very important element of equipping science communicators to deal with what's going on in science communication in general. So Frank already introduced the new, of course, we can't speak about new media anymore, but still many people do so. So there's a new science communication landscape, which is very, very much which has shaped due to the digital transformation and the upcoming of new forms of digital communication, new forms of social interaction, a very, very important change of the role that journalism plays as compared to other forms of public communication and so on. So you all know this. I don't have to go into so much detail, but what that means for science communication is that we have this fundamental and ongoing change of the science communication landscape due to this digital transformation. Frank already introduced this, and we also have a diversification of science communicators. So we still, of course, have professional communicators like journalists, and we have science communication PR professionals, for instance, who work at universities, and of course also scientists themselves have way more opportunities to talk about their science, their research, and so on. But we also have a broad range of lay people. So people from NGOs, from corporations, also science skeptics, science deniers, and so on, who have the possibilities to speak up and to share their opinions in the public. In this regard, we also see a strong strategic use and also an instrumentalization of science. So you probably all remember advertisement campaigns where science infos are used, and you also remember probably campaigns by NGOs like Greenpeace. Of course, they are the good ones, but still they use science for their ideological purpose. So also this has changed a lot. And of course we have, and also this was something that Frank introduced and that Andy referred to, new modes of interaction and of presentation of science in the public sphere. So we have this very tremendously changing realities that also at the same time are challenges for science communicators. So if we think about science communicators, in this way, I refer to professional science communicators. So people who are in one way or the other educated to communicate science to the public. So of course we can expand this and also address other actors, but in our sense, we refer to this group of people. And we argue that also for them making science communication, so rather on a meta level, is an essential approach that should be covered by science communication training. So we assume that one task of academic science communication programs is to equip students with the competences, and science communication for us is one core competence to deal with science communication in this diversified and complex communication environment. And our question in WeThink was how science communication prepares students to manage this new science communication landscape. So what I'll present now basically is what we did so far, and what we did so far is not already answering our questions completely, but we started to have a look at literature that has been previous research that has dealt with science communication education so far, and we also try to develop or to find out which competences these literature deals with and which competences are regarded necessary in previous literature. And we also did a scoping study where we wanted to seek how different science communication trainings, especially degree programs, so programs that lead to a bachelor's or a master's degree, how they deal with this landscape and how they therefore use science sense making as a certain approach of science communication. So what we are planning to do, so I'll just give a short outlook in the very end of my presentation, is to develop and pilot training resources. So this will be one core element of, or one core outcome of the research project, when we unfortunately have to finish this project in approximately 1.5 years. So I said we have also done a scoping study. So this is just a short overlook on the countries that we were looking on when we searched for science communication programs across Europe and especially across the Rethink countries. So we found that not all of our partnering countries, for instance, Poland and Serbia, Eastern European countries, have science communication programs at universities, but quite many have. So the most programs can be found in the United Kingdom, but there are also a quite high number of programs, of degree programs in the Netherlands and in Italy. There are some in Germany and some in Portugal. And because Poland, Serbia are two of our partnering countries, did not have programs, we included Russia and found 4 programs that we used for our research. So before I show you just some results of our rather explorative survey, I would like to introduce a competence model that we developed based on different concepts that we found in the literature. And basically, we found a competence framework by Bruce Lewinstein and a colleague from Israel who's called Baram Sabari, and they tried also on the literature review to figure out different competence models that are relevant, or competences that are relevant for science communicators, and we used this approach together with one approach that was developed by a public relations scholar called Jackie Lei Tang, who develops or who differentiated different forms of competence that are relevant for communication professionals. So these 3 different dimensions of competences are the picture of the world, the conceptual frame, and the professional knowledge. And we argue that all these refer to sense-making in one way or the other, and all these are relevant to basically make sense of science communication and also to equip science communicators with what they need to know in the digital media environment. So I'll just show you each competence dimension very briefly and explain it a bit more in detail and show you how we try to operationalize it in our survey. So picture of the world basically means that science communicators need to make sense of the changing societal framework. So this is basically what Frank introduced in the very beginning. That means that this category addresses the overperception of the science communication landscape, the perception of media change, but also the changing orders of knowledge in society that appear due to the new possibilities of public communication, and also risk perceptions that go along. So we try to, I think it's just difficult or for us it was really difficult to measure these different categories in a survey. So we'll definitely go deeper in the next research or in the prospect research, but we still try to do so, and we did with different approaches. So first of all, one approach was to ask program managers. We surveyed program managers what science communication would be for them. And you remember you just produced your own word cloud. Again, we started to collect different bits and pieces of these understandings of science communication just to measure this conceptual framework. And you see there are quite different aspects that are related to science communication and that help people to make sense of science communication in general, so on a meta level. And we also asked them on a very in a more narrow perspective how they would basically to which extent digitalization and media change is part of their curriculum, because we argue that only those programs that integrated into every module and part of the program really anticipate this tremendous change. And you see, of course, this is not representative, but from the small panel that, or the small sample that we had, only 1/3 has this comprehensive approach. So the second category refers to the conceptual frame. And again, it's about making sense. And in this perspective, it's about making sense of professional and normative demands of the profession of science communication. And again, we have different subcategories. So the relevance that digital media is given for science communication, the different role concepts that science communicators have, assessments of effectiveness, assessments of quality criteria, but also, oh, sorry, it's doubled. Sorry, that's just a mistake in the table. So, but these are the most important subcategories that help science communicators to make sense of their professional self-understanding. And again, we try to operationalize this in our survey, and we try to ask program managers how graduates should evaluate digital media and what their perceptions should be when they finish their studies. And again, there were quite different answers. So in general, they argued that their perception should be that the dissemination of diverse scientific content online has also a positive impact, because in the public we always, or we quite often hear about risks, but this positive impact should be seen too, and that also digital media help to foster public engagement with science. But of course, they also should anticipate negative effects and be aware of the risks. And then again, we asked for different perceptions that students should have about themselves and their ideal roles, and the roles that they should play as a science communicator. And there was quite a range of options, and we see that this professional identity for science communication was very, very much emphasized, but also knowledge about the media system and the role of, for instance, digital media in the public. Last but not least, we have this third dimension. So basically, we call it professional knowledge. So making sense of strategies, tools, and instruments for effective and socially responsible science communication. And this is interestingly something that all programs have integrated very much. So, and probably this is also something you think about if you think about digitalization and science communication training. So it's basically about how to use certain tools, how to use certain channels, the technical knowledge that you need to use them. And of course, this was also something that was part of our survey. So the professional knowledge taught in programs. And yes, and so, as I said, this is just an explorative approach to measure how these things were used in different programs. And we need more research to see how this is used in general, but still there are some. This gives some indication that there's quite some work to do. So as I said in the beginning, we argued that sensemaking is a multidimensional approach to prepare prospective science communicators, also in science communication training. And this training could and should strengthen these competences to equip students for the new and fuzzy science communication landscape. And what we are heading for is to develop, pilot, and evaluate training resources based on our research, based on the sense-making approaches that Frank and Andy just presented, based on quality research that we did, and also based on these competence models that we developed. And these models will also be integrated into existing undergraduate and postgraduate programs, and these are things that will come in the near future. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Sì, quindi facciamo domande e risposte, poi possiamo essere tutti assieme adesso, giusto? Perfetto, grazie. Ci sono solo 2 domande per ora. Okay, bye. Okay, thank you very much to you all for listening and also joining our participatory exercise. I'm really happy to be now on the screen with all the speakers. And we actually have a few questions from the public. I'm going to read them out loud because my colleagues cannot see them, so it will be brand new questions for them. The first questions that we have received says, how to deal with appealing contents that are more visible than valid contents. Maybe we can think about how sense-making can help us understand how these appealing contexts become more visible for people, more visible than the valid contents. Do you think that sense-making has something to say about this issue? Please go ahead, make a sign if you would like to say something. Andy, please. Thank you.
Okay, so I think just sort of drawing on the case studies that we presented, I think the second case study is relevant to that in that the difficulty that sort of young person, the young male that we described was encountering was that their friends were looking at this kind of very visible online content, some of which was misleading. I think broadly what the research that we've just presented now, as I say, it's just a snapshot, shows is that different individuals interpret information very differently according to their context. And drawing in what Berta was saying, that traditionally within science communication training, what we've tended to do is encourage journalists and other science communicators to use traditional approaches to convey the authority, the expertise, to quote sort of journal articles, to quote scientists. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think we need to acknowledge the fact that people do interpret information according to their own context, and it presents real challenges around how we do that. And I think rather than getting frustrated by people looking at this content, I think we need to accept that it's happening. It is frustrating, but I think what sense making can help us do is understand a little bit more about maybe the process and the sort of the nature of the decision-making process that people go through when they're interpreting information, and then sort of help with the training. So I think we need a sort of a more nuanced approach to what we do to recognize these sort of individualized ways that people make sense of science.
Thank you, Andy. Frank, I think you would also like to contribute to the discussion.
Yes, I was a bit chewing on this distinction between appealing and valid, as if a valid cannot be appealing and the other way around. But I think what is actually important in this sense-making approach, and also in the results that we gathered, is that you have to see sense-making, first of all, as a process, and also the importance of relation and connection. So you see also in the stories that Andy shared, you see that how people are, the relations and connections that people have are very important in how they not only access information, but also interpret it, evaluate it, what kind of weight it gets in their sense making. So that's one thing that is, I think, important to take into account, that you can't communicate if you don't relate to people. And another thing is, I think that there are always concerns or needs or ideas that are legitimate, that behind people's ideas. So even if people follow a conspiracy, theory that there are needs or concerns underlying that move or that behavior. So I think the sense making can also help to sort of look what's behind these conspiracies or misinformation videos that people send around, and not discard it right away.
Thank you, Frank. We have a second question that is not so much related to sense making, but maybe we can also see if we can establish a link there. The question says how to be aware of conflicts of interest affecting what the science communicator communicates. I think it's quite in line with the first question we had. And this leads me to maybe add one more element here. That is, of course, science communicators are human beings like all of us. So, of course, they also undergo this process of making sense of science themselves, I think. Therefore, it can be that sometimes they have conflicts of interest, but it can be also that maybe sometimes they are making sense of science. That's maybe part of this process that are also doing themselves. What do you think?
Definitely, they are part of team science and not part of team skeptic. And I think I see that Beerte wants to respond as well. I just want to say one brief thing that I also discussed this morning in another ESOF session. It's a finding from the survey that Andy and his colleagues did, where we noticed that a lot of science communicators actually have a sense of disconnect with communities of people that are not interested in science or that may be skeptic of science. So it's actually difficult for them to have these conversations because they don't feel that they belong to that other community. So I think that's also points nicely to the need to have sense making on both sides. Beerte, what did you want to say?
Yeah, thank you. So this also reminds me to a question that I heard in a panel I had previously, where somebody asked if why people would believe in science and not just accept science. So I think a distrust is always healthy, or a certain level of distrust is always healthy. But on the other hand, that links to our the research on quality that we did, so that we didn't present here in this panel due to time restraints, but still. We try to ask science communication experts, so basically science communication scholars, how quality changes and what's the most important aspects for quality in the digital media environment. And one very important core aspect that maybe all of them said is transparency. So transparency of financing issues, transparency of interests that are behind things, and so on. So maybe that could be something that to acknowledge what is good science communication, what is bad science communication. If somebody manages to make his or her interests transparent, then it's, I think, acceptable. Maybe that's one approach that we should promote in the future.
Indeed, I think it has also to do with revealing your own identity. I think as a scientist, when you are introduced in science and taught how to be a scientist, you learn that you have to get your own personal inclinations, preferences out of the way, to be unbiased, to become objective in your research. I think this is something that is also mimicked to a large extent by science journalists. The importance to be unbiased and to present results as they are. And I think it would be, and of course this has good reasons, but I think it would be good. It would be interesting to experiment with also revealing your own perspective and your own values and ideals as a journalist in order to develop these trustworthy relationships.
Andy, I think you also wanted to add something.
Yeah, it just prompts other questions in terms of, one of the things that seems to be coming through is that people's personal connections seem to be quite important in the way that they make sense of information. And if, as Frank was mentioning earlier on, if people have, their personal relations, their friends, their family, that has a big impact on the approach that they take and what they interpret and how they interpret that information. So again, it would be quite interesting because when we communicate, we typically play out certain roles. We're the scientist on team science, or we're the science journalist on team science. But that's one aspect of our lives. It would be interesting to know if we related to audiences in different ways and kind of brought in other aspects of who we are as individuals. Would that change how people perceive the information that we give them? Would that make us more relatable? Do we always need to be just the scientist or just the journalist? Is there some other way that we can sort of form those connections with others who might sort of interpret information in a different way if we didn't do that?
Thank you. So I wanted to spend a few minutes with you talking about what is going to happen next, because it looks like we are collecting a lot of really interesting data in the research that is being performed. Maybe we can mention to participants what are going to be the next steps, and also where they can maybe find information related to the research that is being done in sense-making in Rethink. And I just wanted to briefly mention that we have, at the moment, we have an open call for contributions on JCOM, the Journal of Science Communication, that is an open access journal fully dedicated to science communication. We accept contributions until the end of October. And we do have, we will see some of the research also being published there quite soon. I don't know, maybe Frank, if you would like to go first and let us know a bit about the plans ahead and how can people maybe join our work in case they are interested in the future.
Yes, as I already said in the beginning, the Rethinker spaces are an important part of our project in the 7 participating countries. These form local hubs. So one way, if you are living in such one of those countries, would be to contribute via these Rethinker space discussions. Now, the sense-making study will continue for a few months and will be finalized by a discussion of the results in the Rethinker spaces. Then, of course, we hope to publish our results in a scientific journal, but we will also share these results in perhaps more accessible forms like a blog. And then the next phase in our project is really about developing new frameworks and new strategies for science communication and experiment with those small scale in the Rethinker spaces and in our own teaching and training programs. So we are now moving from mapping the landscape to developing these frameworks and strategies. So we are going to develop strategies to tap into this sense-making process, to help science communicators and journalists relate to these different audiences and these different sense-making processes, and to make these interactions more open and reflexive. We are also developing a quality framework for digital science communication that Beerte can perhaps elaborate on.
Shall I do this now? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I just briefly introduced our quality research. So what we did so far was a Delphi study with approximately 30 science communication scholars, international science communication scholars, most of them professors for science communication from different fields like STS, communication science, psychology, and other fields. And we wanted to ask or wanted to know from them what science communication is, which categories of or indicators of science communication quality are important to assess science communication quality, and also how science communication quality can be promoted. And we did this in 2 waves. So Delphi studies deal with different waves. So we made a survey with very many open questions, sent it to them, analyzed the data, and gave the data back to the panel, and they responded to our new questions based on the first round. And we are about to analyze the second wave now, and we'll take this to the rethinker spaces that Frank just introduced, because we want to have this practice or this diverse perspective too, and confront them with the results and have some kind of third wave, and then see what comes out of this. So one thing will be that we'll try to develop quality criteria just to give, for instance, stakeholders from politics, from science communication, from journalism, to give them something that they can orient towards to assess science communication quality. And we will also try to bring this to different fields and different groups in science communication to help them to find or to differentiate good from bad science communication. So yeah, that's what will take place in the near future.
Thank you. We don't have any more questions from the audience. So I think maybe we can wrap up the session now. We hope that this topic was interesting for you. In case you would like to know more about our project, you can go to our website. It's rethinkscicom.eu. You will find a lot of information there, and you can join the conversation. You can just drop us a line, and we will be happy to keep you informed about the project activities, and of course involve you in case you are based in one of the countries that have rethinker spaces going on. Italy is one of them. So in case you are joining from Italy, our rethinker space is based in Trieste, and that's where we would really all like to be right now. I thank you very much, the speaker. I don't know if you would like to say a last few words before we leave. Maybe we can do a very last round, since we are lucky enough to still have a few minutes left, just to say goodbye. Frank, would you like to go first?
Yeah, what can I say? I enjoyed listening to our discussions, and I sincerely hope you all did as well. Out there somewhere, and I hope we can continue this work and help science communication to improve the relationship between science and society.
That's great. Thank you, Frank. Maybe Andy?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So again, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope it's prompted some interesting questions in your minds. Maybe you're doing some sense making about our sense making practices now, and thinking about how you might sort of employ it in your line of work. What I would say is, if you are interested in anything that you've heard today, don't hesitate to get in touch, because we're really keen to hear your views and sort of potentially maybe through the rethinker spaces sort of expand those who are involved in the project as well. So maybe if I hand over to Berta, I'll say cheerio.
Yeah, just a personal note at the very end. So I hope that there will be a life after Corona, and for the next meeting that we can meet in real life and see each other's faces and ask real questions and get a real discussion done. And yeah, so thanks a lot for taking part in our panel, and have a good afternoon in beautiful Trieste, hopefully.
Thank you. And Enrico, would you like, as you were the first one to welcome us, would you like to wrap up from Trieste?
Yes, thank you, Marzia. So thank you very much to all the speakers, all the colleagues. Thank you very much to all the attendees. And hopefully see you soon in Trieste in real life. Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you also very much to the technical support that has been really amazing. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.